It's been a crazy, ridiculous day. Jane Jacobs and Malcolm Gladwell, who pulled that one out earlier too. I think that was just insane. Thank you, everybody. It's been very fun to be here today. And just what an exciting city, what an exciting campus. It's very, very, very nice to be here. Minnesota, we would say, it's pretty good. It's not bad. I want to get going tonight because we have got a lot to talk about. But I just want to say briefly about our organization. Our mission is to support a model of development that allows our cities, towns, and neighborhoods to become financially strong and resilient. The whole thing did start as a blog back in 2008, me writing to try to really figure things out that were in my head. And it has grown far beyond anything that I thought. If you're interested in our conversation, if you're interested in the work that we're doing, we're very active online still. We have a full media site now. We're doing 3 posts a day. We're doing podcasts and video and all kinds of things. All of it to help expand this conversation beyond the architects and engineers and planners and city officials, and really to the people who build our cities and make them work, that being all of you. I want to start this whole conversation tonight by having you think about the way we built cities thousands of years ago. If you think back to, and these are 2 artist renderings, the one on the left is ancient Ur, Fertile Crescent, 3000, 4000 BC. The one on the right, of course, is ancient Rome. If you think about these places, they were built around the dominant transportation technology of the day, that, of course, being your 2 feet. People walked everywhere. And so the scale of the buildings, the distance between different types of things you would do on a normal day, the spacing, all this was based around a society of people who walked. You can fast forward thousands of years. This is my hometown. I live 2.5 hours north of Minneapolis, St. Paul, in a little town called Brainerd. This is what it looked like back in 1904. While people would arrive here by stagecoach, they would arrive by train. Once they got here, they would get around on foot. And so the scale of the place, the distance between different types of things you would do on a normal day, the spacing, all of this was very similar to cities that we had seen for thousands and thousands of years. Beginning in the early 1900s and then accelerating after World War II, we began to build cities around a different transportation technology. That, of course, being the automobile. We came up with different building types, different building styles, different ways of arranging things on the landscape. If we were to ask Americans today to explain this change, they would more than likely talk about it in terms of progress. We were a society of people who walked everywhere, so we build cities around people who walked. We are now a society of people who drive, and so we build cities around people who drive. Someday we will have jet cars, and we will build cities around people with jet cars. And someday we will teleport, and our cities will look completely different than they do today. This is a narrative of progress, things always getting better. And it's very comforting to us to think of it in that way because it puts us on this continuum, right? There's another way to think about this, however, that isn't quite as comforting. And I want to put this idea in the back of your head as like a seed to kind of blossom as we have this conversation here tonight. When we look at these ancient cities, even when we look at ancient Earth, we have to understand that by the time you get to that point, you have had thousands of years of humans building cities. And the knowledge on how to do this was gained the hard way, right? Through trial and error. People built something, what worked, they would keep and expand upon. What didn't work would go away. And by I mean go away, I mean people died, civilizations failed, things ended, miserably for people. Those ideas were not transmitted to the next generation. By the time you get to a place like ancient Ur or ancient Rome, you have a style and development that have been tried out and experimented on and perfected and honed by trial and error for a long, long period of time. By the time you get to my hometown, you have an approach to building and development that is essentially universal. In cultures all over the world, in different civilizations, different latitudes, different continents, we see people building cities in roughly the same way. The architecture was different, the building materials were different, but the layout, the design, the scale, all of this was very, very similar around the world. When we look at this style of building, even though for most of us, this is all we've ever known, right? This is the way things are done. As a young engineer starting out in an engineering firm, I was told, this is the way we've always done it, right? It's important for us to realize how new this is, how new these concepts are. We didn't try this out in Illinois for, 2 centuries, see what happened to those crazy people, right? And then take those ideas and bring them here, right? We just tried this out across an entire continent, all in one generation. These ideas weren't developed through trial and error. They were largely the result of, think tanks and intellectuals, people coming up with the idea of hierarchical street networks, modern zoning, or financial mechanisms. Brilliant ideas, but theories nonetheless. It's important for us to understand that this style of development is actually a huge experiment. It's an experiment that's in very early stages. And even though for us this seems like the way things have always been done, this is a massive, massive divergence from thousands of years of collective wisdom on how to build cities. One of the things we did very early on at Strong Towns was to ask some very pointed questions about why is our development pattern not working out financially? Why, even in cities where we see enormous amounts of growth, enormous amounts of job creation, all kinds of investments, do we see cities struggling to do basic things? Why can't we paint a crosswalk? Why can't we keep a sidewalk repaired? Why can't the library stay open past 5 o'clock? Why can we come up with millions of dollars to build another 2 lanes on a shortcut around town, but we don't have the money to keep the streetlights on past 11 o'clock? Why is this? And so we said, let's take a look at the parts of our development pattern that we can actually go out and measure and see if by doing that we can develop some understanding of actually what is going on. This is the simplest kind of development you'll ever find. This is a residential street with a dead-end cul-de-sac. These are all residential homes. The street ends right here. There's no through traffic. There's no commercial traffic. This was built in the mid-1990s. When this was built, it was a gravel road. The city said, we would like it paved. We will pay half if the property owners will pay the other half. The cost was $6,600 per property. We asked the question, okay, based on the taxes the city's collecting from the people who live along this road, the only people who really use it in any substantive way, how long will it take the city to recoup the half that they spent to build it? The answer is 37 years. Now, the road won't last 37 years. And of course, as part of the city agreeing to build it in the first place, they also agreed to take it over and maintain it long term. When the road falls apart and has to be fixed, that's the city's expense. Where's that money going to come from? Not from these property owners here. Here's another development. This one is slightly more intense. If you look, you see it's a residential development with a closed loop system, dead-end cul-de-sac. There's no through traffic, no commercial traffic. The only reason this road exists is to serve the people who live there. This was built in the early 1980s. The developer at that time had paid all the costs to build all the infrastructure. Those costs were then rolled into the sale of the homes, and people have been paying that on their mortgages for, ever since. They've also been paying taxes to the city for the maintenance and the upkeep of this road. Fast forward, the city went out and had to fix this. The road had completely fallen apart. The cost was $354,000. We asked the question, based on the taxes the city is collecting from the people who live within this development, the only reason this road exists is for those people. How long will it take the city to recoup the money they just spent to fix that road? The answer is 79 years. We then said, okay, that's absurd. What if we wanted to collect enough money from these taxpayers between now and the time the road fell apart in order to have the money to actually go out and fix the road? What would that mean? It would mean an immediate 46% increase in taxes and annual increases of 3% over inflation every year for the next 25 years, with all that money going just to maintain the roadway. The sewer, the water, the storm sewer, vastly more expensive undertakings, right? Now, sometimes people say, and especially in the early days of me giving presentations like this, someone would always stand and say, well, Chuck, okay, we get it. We know we lose money on residential property, we make it up on commercial. Commercials are our cash cow. You know, to which my gut reaction is always, okay, I don't know any business that loses money on 90% of what it does and tries to make it up on the last 10%. I don't know why, you know, incorporated municipalities would think that was a good business strategy. Nonetheless, we've kind of convinced ourselves if we just have enough residential property or enough commercial property, it doesn't matter what happens in our neighborhoods. We can make up for it. This is a business park, one of those build it and they will come kind of things that cities are fond of doing in order to create growth and jobs. This one was built in the mid-1990s. It's completely built out now. Every single lot is developed. The city felt this was such a successful project, they wanted to repeat it. They wanted to build the exact same thing on property they own right next door. So just mirror this and put it right there. We said, okay, if we can build the exact thing for the exact same amount of money and get the exact same amount of investment, would this be a good deal? In today's dollars, it's $2.1 million. There's $6.6 million of investment that has been made in this park. Now, pause there for a second. Of that investment made in that park, 4 of those lots are a church. 2 of the lots belong to the school district. It's their bus maintenance facility. 1 of the lots is a county maintenance garage. 1 of the lots is a city maintenance garage. These are all very important things in a community. We need churches, we need schools, we need maintenance facilities. These are all very important, but none of them pay any taxes to the city. Of the remaining lots, the ones that theoretically would be taxpayers, every single one was either sold for $1 and or given a long-term tax subsidy in order to attract that development into this park. For the sake of our analysis, we assumed that every single lot would be built on within 12 months of this new infrastructure going in, and that every penny of new revenue would go to paying off this bond, and that the entire park would be developed by non-subsidized, full tax-paying entities. If that were the case, it would still take almost 3 decades, 29 years, for the city to break even. That's 29 years where everybody else's taxes would need to go up to plow the snow, mow the ditches, provide police protection, fire protection, and every other service that was needed. And that's in the most wildly optimistic of scenarios. Now, I used to go through and do a bunch of these. I was so proud of the work we had done. We had so many examples. I found I can make the point in just 3, more than 3, and people start crying, and they just would go in the wrong direction. If you're someone who likes case studies, we've got a bunch of these on our website. I welcome you to go there. I'll give you that address at the end. But let me kind of walk you through what's going on. And I'm going to apologize. I'm an engineer. I kind of like charts. I know, non-engineers maybe are lukewarm about charts. I'll walk you through this one. There's 3 charts on this presentation. They will not be painful. I absolutely promise. Let's say that we have a piece of property. And a developer comes to us and says, I have this piece of property I would like to build upon. I am willing to, at my expense, build all the residential buildings, all the commercial buildings. I will build that. I will meet all of your codes and regulations, city. I'm not asking for any subsidies at all. I am willing to, at my expense, put in the required roads and streets and curb and sidewalks. I'll pay for the pipes and the pumps and the valves. I'll do all that. The only thing I'm asking as a developer is that you, the city, agree as part of this development that you will take on the long-term responsibility of serving and maintaining this new development. What would we say? We say, fantastic, right? You're coming, you want no money, you follow all of our rules, you're not asking for any subsidies. This is the ideal scenario, right? But let's say, we're smart, prudent people, we've heard of this strong town stuff, we want to do the right thing. So when the money from this new development starts to come in, what we do is we take the portion that would normally get spent in other parts of the city, fixing and maintaining stuff, and we just set that aside. And every year when that money comes in, we just set that portion aside, and we allow it to accumulate so that when we get out a generation from now, and we have to make good on that promise that we will fix and maintain stuff, that we've got a pot of money to do it. This is what that looks like. In year 1, everything is brand new. It hasn't cost you anything. The new tax revenue comes in, and we take that portion and we set it aside. In year 2, more money comes in, we add to what we had in year 1. In year 3, we add a little bit more. In year 4, we add a little bit more. And you can see that every year we have money coming in. A 5-year-old road isn't costing us anything. A 10-year-old pipe isn't costing us anything. A 15-year-old sidewalk doesn't cost us anything. And the money just accumulates and accumulates. We get a couple of decades out, and we're feeling pretty rich, right? We've got quite a pot of money. The problem is when in year 25, in this example, we have to actually go out and fix something, what we find is that the cumulative amount of money we brought in is insufficient. And from a cash flow standpoint, we run far into the negative. Now, cities are not one development, right? Cities are a collection of developments, a collection of neighborhoods. So let's say a couple years after that first development goes in, our developer comes back and says, you know, that worked out really well for me, it worked out really well for you. I would like to do a similar size development. And every other year from this point forward, the developer walks in the door with a similar size proposal. In other words, the ideal scenario for any city. Nice, steady, continuous growth. And we take that money and we set it aside and we save it for the day when we have to make good on all these promises we're making as we grow. Here's what that looks like. In year 1, you have your first development that comes online, starts pays in the entire 25 years shown here. Year 3, you've got a second one, pays in. Year 5, year 7, year 9. And you can see that not only are you very successful in attracting growth, but your cash flow is starting to just, you know, exponentially move upward. You're feeling very, very rich. You've had all this growth. It's growth upon growth upon growth. And when you get to year 25, and you have to make good on that promise you made way back in year 1, yeah, you got to spend a little bit of money, but it's not a big deal, right? You've had all this growth. The growth creates what we call the illusion of wealth. Because as we all intuitively understand, if you lose money on every transaction, you don't make it up in volume. If you lose money over the long term on every project you do, the further you go out in time, the more downward pressure there is on your budget. This is the answer to that question. You know, why are cities struggling? Why, despite having all the growth and jobs and incentives and you know, initiatives and infrastructure capital investments, why don't we have any money to do simple things? It's because we're living way, way out here. Way out here. Now let me ask you a couple hard questions here. Question number 1. Do you recognize yourself in this chart? Do you see you in this? Because this is human nature. This is why people smoke, right? I smoke and then, oh, you know, emphysema, right? This is why you'll, you know, instead of going for a jog, you'll have that extra bowl of ice cream and watch TV, right? Oh, this show is good, the ice cream tastes good, oh no, heart disease, right? We're programmed as humans. It's called cognitive discounting. We're programmed as humans to value highly today positive, reinforcement, pleasurable things, and to deeply discount in the future negative potential ramifications. This is how we're wired. We have this debate in this country, you know, is government good or bad? Are people who work in government lazy, or are corporations greedy? We have this bizarre divide. This is just human nature. This is the way we're wired. Let me ask you a follow-up question to that. What happened to the civilizations thousands of years ago that developed on these human nature principles? What happened to that? They went away. Those ideas were not transmitted to the next generation. They weren't copied. They didn't become part of the DNA of how we build communities. They didn't get passed on. We're living way, way out on the far end of this experiment. And the world seems very normal to us, right? We look at a place like Detroit and we say, what a crazy anomaly, right? look at a place like Gary, Indiana, and we say, who are those people? We don't even know them. It's such a foreign, crazy place, right? It's funny because I travel around the country and everybody has a narrative for Detroit, right? Everybody has an explanation. If you're of a certain mindset, you will look at Detroit and you'll say, it's greedy corporations. Or if you're of another mindset, you might look at them and say, it is those people who did that. Or you've had some like warped, screwed up narrative to explain it. I can tell you from my vantage point what happened in Detroit. Detroit started this experiment before everybody else. They did it more robustly than all of us, and they arrived at the final destination ahead of us. You cannot take a population, spread them out over this much area, not build their individual wealth in any substantive way. We actually have lower net worth family-wise than we did back before all this started, and expect a positive outcome, right? We have to actually start having a conversation about how we build places that are financially productive. How do we do this? I want you to go back again with me and think about the way we used to build cities. Does this city, do any of you recognize this place here? Does that look familiar to any of you? Have you seen this photo before anywhere? If I said this was Valparaiso, would that shock you?
Yes.
It would. Why?
Wow, they're similar. I know a little bit of the history. There are some similarities, but not exactly the way the streets are laid out now.
That's not it right there, huh? If I said that was Chicago, would that shock you? Right? Minneapolis? The trees are, it couldn't be Houston or Dallas, right? These are definitely northern trees. Here's the point with this picture. Every city that ever started, that was ever founded prior to this new experimental way to build, right? So any city that had its beginnings before the Great Depression started just like this. A little pop-up shack. This could be Chicago, right? Chicago started like that at one point. Indianapolis started like that at one point. Manhattan, San Francisco, Vancouver, they all look like this at some point in going back in time. You could go back and say, London, Paris, Rome. This could be Romulus and Remus standing out here, right? Like at some point in the past, this is what Rome looked like, a little pop-up shack, some hopes and some dreams, right? Across this continent, we built thousands of places just like this. And for a variety of complex reasons that defy our ability to predict or project, or even to fully understand after the fact, a lot of these places failed. What happens when a place like this fails? Does the stock market crash? Does unemployment skyrocket? Do we have to have an emergency session of Congress to give $1 trillion to Wall Street banks? No. A few people lose a little bit of money, they salvage what they can, and they move on to the next place. These are just little bets, right? We built thousands of places just like this across this continent. And for a variety of complex reasons that defy our ability to predict, defy our ability to project, even defy our ability to fully understand after the fact. A lot of these places were successful. And when they were successful, they would grow in a very simple to understand way. They would grow incrementally up, incrementally out, and become incrementally more intense. And so after 30 years of incremental development, this street, which by the way, is my hometown in 1870, after 30 years would become that street I showed you earlier. And after another 4 decades of incrementally growing up, incrementally growing out, and incrementally becoming more intense, a bunch of little tiny people, busy bees working all over the place, right? These 2- and 3-story wood structures would be transformed into buildings of brick and granite. This is how cities build wealth. We don't build wealth by going to the casino and putting it all on red. The way we build wealth in our communities is by making small investments over a broad area over a long period of time. Let me show you how incredibly productive this style of development is. These are two identical blocks in my hometown. The one on the left I've labeled old and blighted. The one on the right I've labeled shiny and new. If you look at them, you'll see they're the exact same size. They're the exact same area. They take up the exact same amount of public infrastructure. They're on the same thoroughfare, the same neighborhood. Everything about them is the same except for the style of development that's on them. That old and blighted block looks like this. In the 1920s, as my city was growing incrementally, the next increment of out were these three blocks. What you're looking at here is the pop-up shack equivalent built in the 1920s. So as my city was growing, this would have been the far edge of town. Had things continued on as they had for thousands of years, what would we have expected? You would have seen over time, second and third stories, redevelopment, intensification. Of course, that's not what happened, right? As soon as these were built, you had the Depression, you had World War II, then you had a completely different style of development that just skipped right over this and started building out on the edge. These blocks have stagnated for 90 years. The city labeled it blight, had the block 2 over torn down, and now we have the new drive-through Taco John. Do you guys have Taco John's? No. Okay. You've been to? You've experienced Taco John's?
Experience is the right word.
It is a sophisticated form of Mexican food. In Minnesota, we love this. They have little potato olays. They're called. Yeah, they're terrible because they are like crack. They are like tater tots, but smaller, and then with some addictive seasoning that they do. Yeah, don't start. But we got one now. We got a double drive-through, right? 2 lanes. Everybody was thrilled about this. The planner was happy about this, right? Because it met all the zoning codes, met the setbacks. There's plenty of parking. It met the sign ordinance. None of this non-conforming stuff like the old block. The engineer was happy because we got rid of all this terrible on-street parking. Now the cars can, speed through more quickly. Nothing's slowing them down. The environmental people were happy, actually, because not only you get a little bit of green space, but they actually convinced them to put some native plants in the stormwater area over here. The bike and walk people were happy because they got a sidewalk. The sidewalk ends right there, but you've got the start of something. Here's what nobody bothered to consider. That old, blighted, rundown block has a total value of $1.1 million. That shiny and new block, the same size area, the same amount of public infrastructure, just a different style, has a value of only $800,000. Understand what you're looking at. You are looking at the traditional style of development, the incremental, messy way that we built cities around the world for thousands and thousands of years. You are looking at that in its infancy, after 90 years of neglect, and it still outperforms by a wide margin the stuff we build brand new today. And everybody in this room understands the trajectory of the taco joint, right? We've all been around long enough to see this. 20 years from now, that taco joint will be a used car lot, right? There'll be a new taco joint up the road. 10 years later, it will be boarded up. They'll be selling drugs out the back. They'll be trying to get some type of grant to get it torn down, right? We've all seen this in our communities. We've all seen this life cycle, right? In fact, in the 2 years after this was built, here's what happened to the property values. This is the kind of thing that we've been doing in our neighborhoods. It's very similar to what we've been doing on the edge of our community. This is our Mills Fleet Farm. I'll ask you now, do you have Mills Fleet Farm here? No? No. Mills Fleet Farm it's actually home. We're the home of Mills Fleet Farm in Brainerd. It started, where all the magic started was in Brainerd. And now it's spread all over, apparently not this far, but all over the Midwest. When you walk into Mills Fleet Farm, you have auto parts, animal feed, lumber, guns and ammo, camouflage lingerie. That's the product mix you'll find at Mills Fleet Farm. It's wildly successful. It's so successful here we actually have doubled the store, so this is a massively huge big box store. This is an auto dealership and gas station. This is 19 acres, the most valuable 19 acres in the entire area. When these people show up to a meeting, we just stop the meeting and say, you know, what can we do for you, right? This is 19 acres of our core downtown. Now, I was explaining to people today, you have a beautiful downtown. And I realize that it hasn't reached the potential that it could or should or will, but it's beautiful now, and it's moving in the right direction. You have things that are going in the right way, and a lot of momentum. And it really, I think, every day that goes past, you're having some debates over the library now. I think it's really healthy. We can talk about that later tonight. But I look at the stuff going on here, and it's moving in a good direction. You should feel very excited about the future. We're not necessarily doing that. We don't have a full, like, 2 coherent blocks of a downtown. This is the 9 blocks of kind of the most coherent part. There have been no new buildings built in my lifetime. Plenty that have burned down and are now parking lot. Most of the second and third stories are unoccupied. The first stories struggle quite a bit. If you've seen the movie Fargo, you've seen a not so flattering but not so inaccurate portrayal of my hometown. 19 acres. This 19 acres out on the edge is a total value of $0.6 million an acre. It's a huge sum of money. That 19 acres downtown is worth 78% more. The city actually collects 78% more tax revenue, property tax revenue, from that downtown 19 acres than the stuff out on the edge. Sales tax revenue, it's about equivalent. Even though the one on the edge is a regional draw. Now, how much do we spend to get that stuff out on the edge, right? Hundreds of millions of dollars. We ran a bypass around, we put in frontage roads, we ran sewer and water out, we designed backage roads. I actually, when I was an engineer, designed this, $2.6 million for that backage road. How much did my generation spend to get this wealth here? Nothing, right? That was wealth that my great-great-grandparents and their contemporaries built slowly and incrementally over time, and then bequeathed to us as an endowment of sorts that would continue to pay back. We've kind of slowly melted down. What happens when Mills Fleet Farm goes out of business? It's heretical to say in my hometown, but at some point that will not be the highest and best use of that property. I mean, we don't have the Hudson Bay Company anymore, right? I mean, there's a life cycle to everything. What happens when that's no longer the best use of that property? I don't know. But based on what we've seen in other places, we can be pretty confident that that's the most valuable it's ever going to get, right? That's the peak. There's no upside from here. There's 134 different properties in the downtown. What happens when one of them loses a tenant? Or someone goes out of business or sells their business? What happens when a business is not viable down there? Or what happens when in all of our planning genius we figure out that, oh, we just don't have enough residential property, but we have too much office space? Or we have too much residential and not enough office, right? These buildings are incredibly flexible. They can be changed and turned into many things. They're adaptable. This style of development is not only very limited financial upside, but is really, really fragile. This style of development not only has tremendous, really unlimited financial upside and very limited financial downside, but it is highly adaptable and resilient. In that churning of trial and error, it's really easy to understand why people who wanted their places to exist over long periods of time would develop a development pattern like this, right? This type of productivity is something we see in cities all over this country. A good friend of mine, Joe Minicozy, has modeled hundreds of places across this country. He is with a firm called Urban 3 out of Asheville. If you've ever seen their work, it's mind-blowing. What I'm going to show you now is a 3D model of value per acre. What financial productivity, if you think of a farmer going out to a farm field and spreading seed, the places that grow up the most robustly, we say that's the most productive parts of the field. Well, what I'm going to show you now are the most productive parts of a city. Where do you have the most value per acre? The most financial wealth per acre. This is Buffalo, New York. And I start with Buffalo because Buffalo is the quintessential Rust Belt town. Lost huge amount. Every census since 1940 has lost population. Its core has been kind of gutted out, lots of disinvestment. Yet, when we step back and we say, where is that historical development pattern? Where is the financial heart of a city like Buffalo? Can you point to their traditional downtown? And not only is it massively productive financially, but it outperforms everything around it. It is a massive repository of wealth, even despite the decline. We see cities that are smaller than this have the same exact thing. This is a city of about 50,000 in upstate New York, same kind of thing. Here's your walkable, traditional neighborhoods, the incremental stuff. It just kills it. It outperforms everything. It's financially really, really potent. We can go to tiny cities like this one. This is about 1,200 people. When I first went to this city, they said, Chuck, we've got some really good stuff going on out here. We've got some really good stuff going on out here. But these neighborhoods here are terrible. We've got to figure out a way to change, get this stuff torn down and get something new built in here. And then we showed them where all their wealth was. In those poor neighborhoods. In those neighborhoods where all the poor people live. Now, hand me one of those flyers. Because I'm not sure how much time we got left. Because
you're good.
What time is it? 6:15. Okay. So the title of this talk is How Individuals Can Impact Local Communities for Good. Have we got to that yet? No. This is all set up for that. Okay? So in the last 5 minutes, we will talk about that. Because I want you to understand this part of it. Our cities are going broke. The way we built things in the past really worked well. We can't just go do that today, right? Because we're very different people. We have very different start conditions. We're not just going to go like recreate the old city, but what we can do is learn from what they did, right? We can learn. And I want to show you to help you kind of visualize, because the scale at which we need to work now is not the scale of the city or the corporation. It's the scale of the person, the block, the neighborhood. So these are from North Carolina to give you some examples of what some of these things look like. Here's a Kmart at $384,000 an acre, a Walmart at $967,000. These are out on the edge of town, same kind of thing you've got here, right? Yet when we go to their old downtown, we see a warehouse that's been converted into a supper club, $5 million an acre. And here's the one I want you to look at. Jimmy's Pizza, $3.4 million an acre. 10 times the Kmart in financial productivity. Let me ask you a question. Residents of Valparaiso, students, do you guys have what it takes? Do you have the thoughtfulness, the intelligence, the ability to build something as sophisticated and refined as Jimmy's Pizza? Because if you do, you can start to build tremendous amounts of wealth in your community. If you look around at your community, and I'm going to beg you to do something, instead of traveling through your community at 30 miles an hour, or 40 miles an hour, or 60 miles an hour, travel through your community at 2 miles an hour. And when you do, what you will see, what will jump out at you, what will slap you across the face, is how much distance there is between everything. And if you think of things the scale of Jimmy's Pizza, what you'll realize is that we have so much underutilized capacity. And what we need to make use of it is not more money, not more big people with big ideas from out of town. All we need is like little stuff, right? We start making good use of things. And we all understand how the economics of a Jimmy's Pizza is different for our community than the economics of a Walmart, right? This is Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis, Tennessee is a fantastic city. I really love it. A lot of really great people there doing great things. But Memphis, Tennessee shows up on a lot of the desperation statistics. Out of wedlock births, homicide rate, poverty rate. Memphis and Detroit are 1, 2, 2, 1 on a lot of those things. Memphis did everything they were supposed to do after World War II to create a successful city. They ran highways through the middle of the city. They tore down buildings to build parking lots. They expanded outward with sewer and water. They built a beltway. They identified neighborhoods they didn't think were that great. They kicked people out. They rebuilt things that they thought would be better. They ripped out the trolley lines. They continued to build out. They eventually built a second beltway. They subsidized businesses to move to Memphis. They subsidized businesses to stay in Memphis. And at one point, they decided they needed to be successful an NBA basketball team playing in a pyramid-shaped stadium down on the Mississippi River. Now, they ultimately did get a basketball team, right? They got the Grizzlies to move from Vancouver. The problem is when the Grizzlies came to town, they didn't like this stadium. So the city wound up building them a new stadium a few blocks away. This one sat empty for over 15 years. With $200+ million of additional state and local subsidies, they were able to transform this into a Bass Pro Shop. This is what we at Strong Towns call orderly but dumb. I want to show you the opposite of orderly but dumb. I want to show you chaotic but smart. Because chaotic but smart holds the key to how we actually start building wealth and value again in our cities. This is also Memphis, Tennessee. This is a little street called Broad Avenue. Broad Avenue was a streetcar stop. When the streetcar was ripped out, a highway was put through the middle of the neighborhood. Without the streetcar traffic, without the foot traffic, this block just died. Some neighbors, fed up with the decline, fed up with the neglect, took matters into their own hands. They went out, they worked with the building owners to get them swept out. They swept up the sidewalks. They painted their own bike lanes. They painted their own crosswalks. They invited businesses to come in for one weekend and open up just so they could show the community what this could look like. They had a bike shop. They had a clothier. They had an ice cream stand. They didn't go get permission from the city. They didn't go get Department of Health inspections. They said, before anybody, gets mad and comes out and tries to shut us down, we're going to be gone anyway. We're just going to be here for one weekend. They went out and they just did it, right? Now, I wasn't here for this, but I was out here 6 months after this took place. When I was out here 6 months later, every single storefront was occupied. The landlord told me that he was able to charge double the amount of rent for the last place to go than what he was asking before the project. The city has gone out and documented 18 new businesses, 32 new jobs, $12 million of property value appreciation. Total public investment, 0. This is chaotic but smart. You see, we have been so obsessed as a country with the idea that we could pursue growth out on the edge, that we could pay the government or other people to take ownership of our cities, of our neighborhoods, of our future, that we could just pay our taxes and they would go out and make things happen, right? And what we find is that when we step back and look today, instead of chasing the dollars out on the edge, we actually can just pick up the pennies, the nickels, and the dimes. They're just sitting there in our core neighborhoods. Valparaiso is dripping with opportunity. Your core neighborhoods are beautiful. They are neglected. There's disinvestment there. There's a bank run on confidence in these places. But they're spectacular. And there's no reason why they can't be so much more than they are today. We were so inspired by the work that the people in Memphis had done. We started a little group in my hometown called A Better Brainerd. We spent a year out in this neighborhood looking at where people struggled and trying to ask the question, what is the next smallest thing we can do to help alleviate this struggle? We saw the mom walking through the ditch, pushing a stroller, weeds up to her waist. What are you doing? I'm trying to get to the grocery store. I don't have a car today, and I don't feel like it's safe to walk on the street, so I'm walking here. We saw the elderly woman walking down the middle of the street, snowstorm, climbing over mounds of snow, with a walker. What are you doing? I have to get to the pharmacy today. I don't have a choice. The sidewalk ends right here, and it's not even shoveled anyway, so I have to walk out here. We started to try out different things. We had kids who would walk to the school in the alleys, and we'd ask, well, my mom told me to walk here because it's not safe to walk on the street. So we did a little thing, because the cars drive too fast. We did a speed study. The cars drive way too fast. 2 out of 3 people go over the speed limit. We went out in the middle of the night and painted narrower lanes. Went out the next day and did a speed study and found that of the 280-some cars that went through, 1 went over the speed limit with narrower lanes. We started to do things like this around and see, what little things can we do to make life a little bit better for the people in this neighborhood? The idea being, if we can make life a little bit better here, we can reverse that bank run on confidence, right? We can start to inject some confidence back in this neighborhood, and people will start investing themselves. They'll start wanting to be here. They'll start seeing this neighborhood go in the other direction. At the end of this, we put together this little report called Neighborhoods First. We detailed 8 projects the city could do to address problems that we saw people struggle with in the neighborhood. Put a crosswalk in here. Put a bike lane in here. Plant a row of trees over there. My city right now is spending $14 million to run sewer and water 2 miles out of town to build a new business park out at the airport. We already have a business park we built in the 90s that's not full yet. But this one would be air-oriented, which is some special kind of magic, right? The idea being, if we make this investment, it will create jobs and growth and, make everybody's life better, right? We've been here. We've seen this. The cost of our 8 projects, $16,700. Let's say the city goes out and spends $16,700 in this neighborhood and nobody's life gets any better. Nobody sees their quality of life go up. We don't improve anything. Nobody looks at this neighborhood and says, wow, this is trending in the right direction. I'd really love to move here to invest here. What happens then? Well, we're out $16,700, right? Not a big deal. But we learned 8 things that don't work. Let's go try 8 new things next year. But I have a feeling that will work, that they will work, right? Because we went out and tried to, in a very humble way, say, where are people struggling? And what's the next smallest thing we can do right now to make that better? I went to the city engineer and I said, I think you could use a sidewalk here. Yeah. Do you know what his response to me was? Why would you say that, Chuck? Yeah. Yeah, we will never find the highest returning investments in our communities sitting behind a desk. We'll never find them by having a visioning session or a public hearing or putting sticker charts on the wall. Today, the way we will bring our communities back, all of us, is by going out and saying, where are people struggling? And what is the next smallest thing we can do to make that a little bit better? And if we can do that, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, not only will we be making the highest returning investments we could possibly make in our cities, but we can't help but make people's lives better in the process. Thank you so much, everybody.